Hello, my name is Andrew Gary and welcome to Seismic Sound-Off, in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. I am joined by Dr. Vladimir Grechka and Dr. Werner M. Heigl to discuss their new book, Microseismic Monitoring. Visit seg.org/new books to learn more. Vladimir has his MS in geophysical exploration and a Ph.D. in geophysics. He has worked as a research scientist, an associate research professor, and for major oil and gas companies. Since 2012, he is a senior technical consultant at Marathon Oil Company, focusing on reservoir characterization with seismic, microseismic, and borehole data. He received the J. Clarence Karcher Award in 1997 and the Best Paper in the Leading Edge Award in 2013. Werner received his Ph.D. in geophysics in 2011 and has a long history working in the field. He joined Apache's E&P Technology Group in 2006 as a senior geophysicist. Since 2008, Werner has been involved in designing, recording, and processing of nearly all microseismic datasets acquired by Apache. In 2011, he launched the Microseismic Special Interest Group in Houston, now managed by the Geophysical Society of Houston. Vladimir starts our discussion next. So to start with, what is your 60-second summary of microseismic monitoring?
Our book is written for geophysicists who practice microseismic and would like to bring their practice to a higher level. The key ingredient in microseismic data processing is a velocity model in which locations of microseismic events and their moment tensors are computed. Our book acknowledges seismic anisotropy as a critical part of velocity models constructed for unconventional shale reservoirs and provides the methodology for anisotropy estimation from typical microseismic data.
Anything to add, Werner?
In addition to what Vladimir had said, I think the book also tried to capture a little bit both of our experience over the years. And what we have observed ourselves, having been involved in numerous of these microseismic experiments, and so we try to incorporate that and add a little bit sort of the practical side and highlight a little bit the practical issues that one faces. And you will see, for example, in the book, there's lots of plots and figures in there that show raw data, and we have deliberately not done a lot of cleaning and editing and filtering to the data, because that's what reality is. You deal and we're going to come to this later when you're going to ask us about what the difference between global seismology and microseismic monitoring is. And one of the big differences is essentially that our data is generally of very low signal-to-noise ratio and very noisy in general, and so it has challenges. And so it's one of the things that I personally wanted to get across. And as Vladimir has already stated, applying the theory to noisy data is challenging. So the book tried to basically explain on how you go about it, and not just some in a simple way, but rather in a way that would allow you to get really good results if you follow what we have in the book.
This is a very good point, Werner, because I am already getting questions to some of our figures, which is pretty cool.
How did in the book did you choose to define microseismic?
It's kind of a bit of a term that at least in our industry has established itself, I would say, over the last decade or so. And when you look at chapter 1, the very first paragraph, I tried to sort of historically capture how the term has been used, and as you can see, we went from microseismics, which was the very first term that people coined up just to distinguish these acoustic emissions that happen when rocks crack, from the term microseism that's been used in among seismologists, and what they simply refer to is sort of just general background noise. And in global seismology, this general background noise is often caused simply by ocean waves hitting on the coastline of continents, right? And they have another term. They use micro earthquakes for earthquakes that basically are generated by not necessarily rock breaking, but by small faults essentially slipping, and they have sort of a cutoff magnitude. They call everything that's less than magnitude 3. They call this a micro earthquake. In our situation, when we monitor hydraulic fracture treatments in unconventional reservoirs, the reservoir just cracks because you pump a lot of fluid into it under high pressure, and the rock just gets strained, and eventually it reaches a point where this strain is released, and this energy shows up in the form of elastic waves, and we call this microseismic waves or microseismic event, and therefore microseismic monitoring. I don't think anyone uses these old terms anymore. You will find the term micro-earthquake being used and microseismic in global seismology, but as I said, it has a slightly different meaning. In our case, microseismic means elastic waves generated by rocks cracking, while on the global seismology, microseism is just a general background noise that's caused mostly by either cultural background noise, roads, cars or trucks driving on the road, just human activity, and predominantly, especially at the lower frequency end of the spectrum, is just these waves hitting the coastline, the beaches in California, on the East Coast and around the world, and just constantly keep the continents basically vibrating, and so that is as far as I understand what seismologists would understand under the term microseismic.
Speaking of Chapter 1, you write in there that the basic principles of microseismic monitoring had been established by the early 70s. Why do you think the level of scholarship for texts now, including your book, has been so minimal?
That's a very good question. And this was sort of, for me, really the biggest learning lesson while I worked on the introduction. People had recognized, people in generally were smart. And especially when you're in a situation where you don't have all the technology available that we have available now, very limited measurements in terms of number and in terms of quality, but a generally good understanding of the involved physics. And so people had to be really ingenious to extract information in such circumstances. And I think a holdup for why microseismic hasn't really developed faster since, let's say, the early 70s or so, I think is really exactly that. The technology just wasn't there to foster further development. This is, you can observe this in physics, and you can observe this in electronics. It's a similar phenomenon. People at some point have accumulated enough data that sort of have a good intuitive understanding of their problems, of the current situation. But to make a step forward would require, or almost always requires, more measurements and measurements with a better resolution and with a better precision. And I think this was the main reason why development kind of stalled since the early 70s, right? And the other thing I think that hurts us a little bit in our industry, at least, is the fact that many of the big oil companies decided over the last, I should say, maybe 15, 20 years or so, to either abandon their research departments or significantly reduce their size and their funding. And therefore, a lot of this research nowadays happens at universities, but the academic environment is very different. There's very different objectives and requirements and things that university professors and their students have to adhere to. And so you see a lot of papers and abstracts being published, but a lot of this, I can tell you, is interesting, but may not have an immediate use in the industry. And so we're kind of sort of in the situation now where technology is there to get better measurements, and we also can acquire measurements in large numbers. But what to do with it now, it just kind of lacks a little bit because of that. And I guess, Vladimir, you can perhaps elaborate on that. I mean, you and I were in similar situations where, and you in a marathon and I formerly at Apache. Oftentimes, the microseismic expertise ends up being a one-man show, and you have limited resources, limited funding, and there's only so much you can do, right?
Yes, and I think this is pretty much the case now in many companies, in the majority of companies, that they have one so-called expert who is doing pretty much everything. And it is very seldom when there are several people doing microseismic in a given company, although there are a few exceptions, but typically it is a one-man show. I think to add to what Werner just said, why microseismic activity took off in the past, say, 10 years or so from the level that it was in the early 2000s, I think it is because hydraulic fracturing provided almost tailor-made application for microseismic. We are doing it simply because our engineers at oil companies want to know what they're fracking. They want to know where their fractures are in the reservoirs. And this is the primary driver, I would say, for acquiring all those microseismic data. And I think if that would not be the case, the industry would not acquire hundreds and hundreds of surveys that we have now.
What motivated the two of you to write this book?
So we decided about 2 years ago, maybe a little more than over 2.5 years ago, to do this. And I think we both were at a point where we had seen enough data, had learned enough, and it just, I think, seemed to be a good idea, at least for me, to put knowledge and experience to paper and make that available, for other people. And there's nothing comparable out there at the moment. We know of, or I'm aware of one other book that's in the works. Professor David Eaton from the University of Calgary is working on one. Yeah, it has, as far as we know, it has a sort of a slightly different outlook than ours. If somebody really wanted to acquire microseismic data and wanted to understand what he needs to know and what he needs to do to get to a good result, and also how to do it, then there was just nothing out there. You would literally be required to sort of do a little bit what I did for my research for the introduction. Figure out what have people done in the past, and what problems have they encountered, what solution have they come up with, and then study more or less the global seismology textbooks, and then somehow fit this into a framework that is applicable to the oil field. And so I think our book should help in that. So at least this was my motivation at the time to really make this effort and put it to paper, just to capture what is necessary and add what we have learned and experienced, and make it available for other people.
Yeah, for me it was also the desire to share my best practices with geophysicists, primarily from service companies. In essence, I wanted to help my colleagues and through them help the microseismic projects that I am constantly running. So time and time again, I see microseismic service companies struggling with velocity model building. And just to give you a quick example, Werner and I were partners on a downhole microseismic project run by a major microseismic service company that just postulated at a certain point that a 4 millisecond misfit between the travel time that they picked from data and travel time predicted by their best model, so that misfit of 4 milliseconds was good, and they postulated it simply because they could not make it any smaller. And on the other hand, I know that the techniques we discuss in the book consistently deliver misfits about 1 millisecond. So it is fourfold improvement on what the industry is doing. And this repeats itself over and over again, and I find myself in the situation that, okay, I get those deliverables, and now I have to do additional work to improve them. For me, much better world would be if the service companies do that, and I just look at it and it is good and move on.
In each chapter, you all include something new. It's ideas, results, data. For each of you, what was your favorite new discovery made in writing the book?
So for me, it was most definitely Appendix 2C. It contains algebraic equations that describe a general group velocity surface. I derived those equations in the fall of 2014, that is a few months before we began working on the book. When I started solving those equations, I discovered, to my surprise, I was surprised at first, that their numerically computed degree was always 43, regardless of what I did to my way of how I solved them, and for many models that I tested. And that was extremely puzzling for me. So why 43? It seemed to be such an arbitrary number. So I kept thinking and thinking about it and kept rewriting the appendix until everything became absolutely clear. So now, 3 years down the road, I can explain in very simple terms to anyone why the degree of equations representing group velocity surfaces in generally anisotropic media should be 43. That result has acquired now the status of mathematical certainty. So this was very satisfactory for me.
So my biggest surprise was the fact that sort of the fundamental principles of the microseismic monitoring method, people had worked that out and understood this decades ago. And then, of course, the once those fundamentals were sort of understood and not all fully developed, but at least understood, the development continues. Yeah, you had then the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, similar situation where you injected waste fluid, and then the next big push for the technology came when it was decided late 60s, I guess, by politicians, and then put in practice early 70s and 80s and early 90s to pursue whether it will be viable to extract geothermal energy. And there, the principle is again very similar. You need to somehow to get geothermal energy out of the ground. You need to pump water in, let the water warm up, and then bring it back up to the surface and extract the heat, and pump the cooler water down again and let it heat up again. So you need to drill a well, an injector well, and a producer well, and in between you need to create fractures, because obviously the water has to penetrate the rock and it has to absorb the heat energy, and you have to extract at some other point. So you need to crack up the rock, and of course you want to know where those cracks are. And so the way this one by now probably famous experiment that was done by Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico. They drilled a well into a shallow granite and then fracked it, and then they monitored microseismically because they needed to know where those fractures are in order to place the producer well properly, right? And in that process, the additional challenge was the much higher temperatures that sensors were and drilling equipment and drilling fluid was exposed to than what we face in unconventional reservoirs. So that again posed extra challenges, and extra technology had to be developed in the process. And yeah, so for me, this was really very interesting to see that the technology that we use in the oil field was mostly developed outside the oil field.
What are some of the obstacles in transferring seismological methods to microseismic?
I think the main difficulty is in the difference in data recording geometries. You know, in global seismology, we have seismometers all around the globe, and essentially you cover the entire focal sphere of earthquakes. In microseismic, we don't have that. But in a way, geophysicists in microseismic industry are tasked to do the same work as seismologists, but we often have to work much faster. Specifically, I'm referring to real-time processing of microseismic data. Then we have to do the same things or similar things in sparser and less favorable geometries than seismologists have, and also in the presence of significant elastic anisotropy of our reservoirs that needs to be estimated for every single survey. So this complex of differences makes many techniques developed in the global seismology hardly applicable for us. We essentially need either tailor what is available to our needs or develop something new.
What is promising about the area of reservoir imaging?
I think it is primarily the potential resolution that those images can have. It is very high because microseismic data have frequencies of hundreds of hertz, making resolution of a few meters quite attainable. No other seismic technology today comes even remotely close to that, although there is a lot of research going on in improving the resolution. And so if the reservoir images can be reliably constructed at such a resolution, granted it is a big if at the moment, but if geophysicists can do that, we are going to see features in our reservoirs that no one dreamed of seeing just a few years ago. So it's going to be a completely new area where many, I would say, conventional geophysical techniques like just imaging can be employed. So I am pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. When you record the seismic waves that are generated when rocks crack, and so with sophisticated methods that we describe in the book, and with sufficient care and caution, you can work out an approximate location of where that microseismic event has occurred. But as Vladimir said, the error bars associated with that locations are probably, I would say, at least in the tens of the feet with a good velocity model, and with a not so good velocity model, probably up into the 100 feet or so or more. And plus you get information from a point, and that point is relatively uncertain. So it is very difficult, not just for us geophysicists, but even more so for engineers and geologists that have to deal with this kind of data, how to interpret now the microseismic event cloud. In some situations, there's some unconventional reservoirs, and that tend to be those where you have a little bit of tectonic stress. These event clouds tend to align in a certain direction, and there the interpretation is perhaps a bit easier. And by interpretation, I mean, so how long is this frac that was created, and how high, and potentially how wide, and how many frac stages do I need on a horizontal, and all of that. But in general, it is very hard. And people spend a lot of effort, assuming you have enough observation, to work out focal mechanisms. But you end up with a focal mechanism that whose location is very uncertain. So, how to interpret now the entire cloud and this set of mechanisms into a consistent picture of how the rock really broke is very difficult. And I have and up to this day still stay away from that, because I think the data quality and resolution is just not there at the moment. But I have hopes with Vladimir that this imaging will help us a little bit. And what it would do is it wouldn't image the points where the events go off, but it would rather image the fractures that were created. And so you sort of have the possibility of painting sort of a spatial picture of what these created fractures might look like, right? And so it's sort of an independent measurement of what has done to the rock when you treat it hydraulically. And I think that it's going to help us or engineers in understanding what happened here, what did we do, and how does the microseismic response relate to that? I mean, can the microseismic response be reconciled with the images? Can it be explained in terms of geomechanics? And this, I think, doing this alone from microseismic event clouds is very hard.
What do you both see in the next 1 to 3 years for microseismic?
With an oil price where it is right now, and maybe let's say over the next 3 to 5 years, somewhere in the $50 to $60 range or something like that, and with costs low enough and efficiencies high enough, I think it'll be possible to produce some of those reservoirs and make money. And so what the implication of that on a global scale is that vast amounts of reserves are now economically accessible. So what that means is, for oil companies that want to make money in these kind of reservoirs, they have to be extremely efficient. And so efficient means, well, keeping your costs down is one aspect, but it can only get you so much. And I think we've reached a point, because if operators squeeze prices more, then service companies go out of business. And so the next step would be in internal efficiencies and landing the wells in better spots and figuring out, so how can we design our frac programs in such a way that we get more production out of it. And I think the only measurement available to help along the way is microseismic monitoring. My hope is, that this need perhaps will force the industry in developing the technology further. And velocity models is a relatively simple and cheap thing to do. Calibrating and developing better velocity models will immediately result in better resolution. A similar development we have seen with reflection seismic. And then I think the next thing would be creating images at high resolutions, so that we see what these reservoirs actually look like on smaller scale, and then how the fractures that are generated, what they look like, and how they relate to the microseismic events that we record.
To add another thought to what Werner just said, and it is a positive thought, that microseismic is in a relatively better position for unconventional than many other seismic technologies, because they were brought in from conventional reservoirs, which are different, and they have different kind of problems that those, I would say, conventional technologies, conventional seismic technologies try to address. Whereas microseismic is perhaps the only one that was created primarily for this task, primarily for monitoring those hydraulic stimulations. And because it is relatively young technology, in a sense of the surveys that just acquired and had the explosive growth in the number of surveys, I think there is a good hope, at least I have it, that microseismic will be at the forefront of this technological geophysical package for unconventional reservoirs.
What do each of you hope readers take away from your book?
What I hope they'll take away is that to get a good result, you have to make an effort, and quite a bit of effort. And if you don't do that, then you see events or dots on the map, as we call this in industry jargon, right? But as I have hinted on before, the interpretability of such a result, I think, is very limited. And one of the arguments that I had with my boss at my former employer was precisely around that topic. He was very surprised to see that not more progress has made in the interpretation of the results that came out of microseismic monitoring. I'm not surprised. What it would take is exactly what sort of the main message of the book is, that you need to have a very good velocity model. And to get there requires sufficient number of observations in the right place and quite a bit of theory that you need to calibrate these models, right? But if you do so, all of a sudden, sort of the scatter in your event clouds reduces, and you may start seeing patterns, and those patterns you may then be able to interpret in a way that is consistent with surface seismic images and consistent with geomechanics. And so, for me, I hope what the readers take away is, if that's where you want to get to, or where your company wants to get to, then you need to make an effort, and how you go about it is described in the book.
Werner said it well. The main message is about velocity models. I hope that the readers will get excited enough that they begin trying to replicate our equations, to code them up, to test them, and likely improve our methodologies, and to learn how to build more precise velocity models than those built today. And I believe that if just a few geophysicists employed in microseismic service companies begin doing that and begin getting better results that we are getting, the word is going to get out, benefiting the entire industry.
Visit scg.org/new books to buy microseismic monitoring today. SCG members save 45%. To receive this discount, remember to renew your membership today. 2017 memberships will expire on December 31. 2018 member dues can be renewed online at scg.org/renew from October 1 to February 28. Please send questions to members@scg.org. Members who renew before December 15 will be automatically entered to win a pre-selected book from the SCG Book Mart. If you enjoy the show, review us on iTunes. Your review helps others find the show. Subscribe to Seismic Sound Off on the podcast app of your choice to receive the latest episodes first. Season 1 of Seismic Sound Off is sponsored by the SCG Wiki, home to hundreds of biographies of key geoscientists, geophysical tutorials, and core content from the science of applied geophysics. Visit wiki.scg.org to learn how you can grow the world's first online geophysics encyclopedia. Original music by Zach Bridges. This episode was produced by Isaac Farley and hosted, edited, and produced by me, Andrew Gary. Special thanks to Susan Stam, SEG Books Manager. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.